Right now I'm walking through Baltimore's newest and swankiest waterfront neighborhood. It's a beautiful Saturday, but there's just one thing missing. People. Like literally any people anywhere. On this particular Saturday, I walked around for about a half an hour, and I could just about count all the people I saw on one hand. So what's going on here? Why are there all these beautiful new buildings, but seemingly no one here to use them? For that, we need to look back at what led up to the Baltimore Peninsula Redevelopment Project as we see it today. Like many Rust Belt cities, Baltimore has been trying to reinvent itself over the past few decades. The population has been cut in half since its peak around 1 million in the 1950s, and much of the heavy industry that was once the engine of the region's economy has long since left.
We turned the gas all the way up. We didn't care about all the smoke that we put out or anything. I mean, it was just production.
By 1958, Sparrows Point was the largest steel mill in the world.
But, as was the case with virtually all heavy industry in America, things really began to decline sharply in the 1970s and unfortunately haven't really changed course since. The city is a shell of its former self, and while there's thriving pockets throughout the city, by and large it would take something big to markedly change the city's fortunes. That's where the developers come in. About 10 years ago, the Port Covington project was first pitched by Under Armour founder and Maryland resident Kevin Plank. It would be on Baltimore's southern waterfront, but it wasn't going to just be any old development project. In Kevin Plank's own words, it was going to be an entirely new city within the city, an American Dubai. By the year 2030, high-rise towers would line I-95, and beneath them would lie a bustling, brand-new neighborhood of 50,000 people, built on a strip of formerly barren industrial land. As a Baltimorean myself, I was stoked. Besides the economic impact that it would have on the city, the construction nerd in me couldn't wait to have a front row seat to see an entirely new city built from the ground up. Despite the grand visions, though, controversy surrounded the project from the beginning. While tax incentives and financial support from the city to wealthy developers is quite common, and maybe a little too common, this particular one set off a fiery debate. First off, the scale of the tax incentives was something never before seen in the city, many times what was provided for similar projects like Harbor East and Harbor Point. But the bigger question that many asked was quite simply, why is a struggling city like Baltimore making hundreds of millions of dollars in concessions to its richest citizen? All for what many saw to be a vanity project that would only benefit a few select residents in the upper class. People on the opposite side of the debate, however, including many of the city's politicians, saw this argument as an oversimplification and eventually passed the tax incentive package of over $600 million. A year later, Goldman Sachs jumped on board with a very public $250 million commitment to the project, and it looked like the project was unstoppable. A little over a year after that, ground was broken. Local politicians all got to have their photo op with the shovel and the hard hat, and Baltimore was one step closer to becoming a miniature Dubai. Multiple buildings got underway, including several residential, several office, and a large mixed-use building that would serve as the unofficial center to this phase of the construction. As the pandemic hit, construction continued relatively uninterrupted, although uncertainty did start to grow regarding the future of the project. Additionally, Under Armour, who was once seen as a rival to Nike, was floundering, a big problem for the project. Besides Kevin Plank's role in the project, there was also plans for a brand new Under Armour headquarters to be built on the southern end of the project. The Under Armour HQ began to be downsized significantly as the company's fortunes fell. Renderings of Port Covington began to look less and less like Dubai and more like an unassuming suburb. In 2022-2023, several of the first buildings began to open. The pace of the project was progressing, but seemed slower and slower as it went along, apparently due to weaker than expected demand. The first phase of the project delivered nearly 500,000 square feet of office space, something that's far less in demand than it was about 10 years ago prior to the pandemic. Apartment leasing in the roughly 600 completed units seems to be in better shape, but despite this, buildings are still offering generous benefits to attract new renters several years after the buildings opened. This combination of limited demand has led to limited foot traffic on the street, as you can very clearly see in this video. The lack of foot traffic, in turn, has led to a lack of retail in most of the ground floors of the buildings, which has led for less reason to be out on the street in the first place, thus reducing foot traffic even further. Now, in 2025, there's been very little chatter recently about new buildings breaking ground, or even early renderings of what the next phases of construction may bring. While there's some other residential units under construction further down the peninsula, they're not part of this project. This means that even if there are no further setbacks, we're still likely several years out from any significant additions to the Baltimore Peninsula project. Now, if this were a project that didn't pressure the city into giving it generous tax incentives, I would be totally cool with the slow timeline. Unfortunately, because the development team chose to go the route of tax incentives, the timeline matters and milestones need to be achieved in order to keep the project's finances afloat. The project is at a crossroads right now. They need to reach a critical mass of residents, foot traffic, and retail options to make the new development a desirable place to live or work. The site is a short but virtually impossible walk from thriving neighborhoods like Federal Hill, Riverside, and Locust Point. If the Baltimore Peninsula continues to be a very high-end ghost town, then most people looking in the South Baltimore area will continue to gravitate towards existing neighborhoods, which provide far more amenities. I've briefly touched on some of the issues with this project, but you may be wondering specifically what is plaguing the project. It seems to have the support of the city, successful business people behind it, and plenty of money. So where's it going wrong? The most obvious problem was the reduced demand for office space following the pandemic. The development team was pushing hard to draw in new employers, providing high-paying jobs that could be the rock that the whole project was built on. This has become increasingly challenging in the last few years. In an effort to attract different industries, the project's marketing team has been constantly rebranding, although seemingly with limited success. First, the project was called Port Covington, the historical name of the area. Then, for a while, it was being referred to as Cybertown, USA, in an effort to try to create a so-called Silicon Valley of the East. Then, the team made a strong but unsuccessful push to make the site the home of Amazon's new headquarters. Recently, the project was rebranded again as the Baltimore Peninsula. Another big problem for the project has been Under Armour's weakness over the years. Its new headquarters was going to be a cornerstone of the project with multiple gleaming waterfront towers. Now it's been scaled back to the point where it's just a converted Sam's Club, a converted Walmart, and one new mid-rise tower. The company has also shed employees, so instead of thousands and thousands of workers going to work at the headquarters each day, there are significantly less. Again, that takes us back to the problem of no foot traffic in the area. The struggles of Under Armour have had another big impact. It's taking Kevin's Plank net worth, which peaked around $6 billion, down to around $1 billion. This may have been one of the factors leading to the major downsizing. As money gets tighter, people tend to take less and less risks. Once again, less Dubai, more Columbia, Maryland. Then there's the logistical problems with the site. Although it does have a lot of things going for it, being right on the water and right on I-95, it also has some major problems that need to be addressed for the project to be a long-term success. While it's close to thriving neighborhoods, it's a virtually impossible walk to get from the Baltimore Peninsula to anywhere worth walking to. I-95, high-speed traffic, train tracks, and private property make it an unpleasant and dangerous walk to get anywhere off the peninsula. Furthermore, there's limited public transportation, maybe a few buses here and there, but nothing significant, meaning that pretty much anybody going to the peninsula has to go by car. And when traveling by car, you have the pleasure of driving on some of the worst road surfaces in the city. Macomb Street, Hanover Street, and some of the others have legacy concrete roads riddled with potholes big enough to flatten tires and bend rims. If the peninsula isn't to a point where it has amenities of its own yet, it should at least make it comfortable to travel to other parts of the city to take advantage of those amenities. And then finally, there's just a few personal gripes that I have with this project that I don't think are playing a material impact on the project's struggles, but I think they're worth mentioning. First off, I think it was an unwise decision to demolish several of the most architecturally significant buildings on the peninsula, particularly the Gold Street Power Plant. The project seems to be going for the gritty industrial chic vibe, but one of the first things to go was some of the more architecturally intriguing, historically relevant buildings. Next, in 2023, the Baltimore Sun building was demolished, but only to its slab. The slab, which was built extra thick to support the heavy printing equipment, is still there. Personally, I think they should have either kept the building and repurposed it or demolished it completely. The torn up remains of the building don't do much to change the area's negative reputation for being a bombed out industrial wasteland, and they don't provide the best view for those $2,500 a month luxury apartments. Finally, there's the noise. I-95 is elevated right above the site, and to put it bluntly, it's really annoying when you're walking around the new development. I don't know if there's really anything that could be done at this point, but it was something that I noticed almost immediately when I was walking around. What does this all mean for Port Covington? Cybertown, USA? The Baltimore Peninsula? I don't really know. On the one hand, there's so many powerful people that have so much invested in the project, it's hard to envision a scenario where it's a total flop. On the other hand, it's facing some pretty significant headwinds and does seem to have lost virtually all its momentum that it once had. Now, again, as a Baltimorean, I would love to see this project succeed and create all the jobs and all the new buildings that it once thought it would. But I just am not confident that that's going to happen at this point.